The U.S. should eliminate statutes of limitations because justice at the end of the day should not have an expiration date. A statute of limitation doesn't protect innocent people, it protects the people that are perpetrating crimes against them, people that are dodging accountability for years, if not decades, and it does not help anybody else. Or statute of limitations do not help anybody else. Um, all it does is it says we can't investigate, we cannot prosecute this crime, even when there is incredibly strong evidence proving that somebody is guilty. A crime doesn't magically become less harmful because 5 years or 6 years or 10 years has passed. The harm has still happened, whether it be fraud, abuse, assault, a form of corruption. The harm has been done, and just because a couple days have passed does not mean that we can just ignore that. We already do this for murder. Murder does not have a statute of limitations because we recognize that crimes need to go answered by the perpetrators. We don't have this for other crimes, and we kind of make it sound like they are not as important, like rape, like incest, like assault is not as important, when at the end of the day, these victims are suffering lifelong consequences of crimes and deserve to have justice. The original reason that we had statute of limitations was in large part because evidence faded over time. This was, a couple centuries ago when we didn't have DNA evidence, when we did not have financial records, when we did not have digital footprints, when evidence did actually vanish and you could not prosecute a case 15 years after the fact. Now, with all of the methods of evidence collection that we have, it is incredibly easy to track something like DNA or something like financial records, and that doesn't fade, it doesn't go away, and we don't have to rely on a witness reporting that something happened. We have hard evidence for pretty much every crime that exists. Um, so yeah, at the end of the day, statute of limitations protect perpetrators of crimes, and they harm victims, and they force victims to go without justice. The question is very simple: do we want a justice system that cares about the truth, or one that cares about deadlines? Justice doesn't expire, harm doesn't expire, the actual truth doesn't expire. Under statute of limitations, the only thing that does expire is accountability, and we should not be allowing that.
Yeah, so Gorse, so are you saying that the statute of limitations, getting rid of the statute of limitations would then mean that we have unlimited amount of time to prosecute crimes, or are you saying we're getting rid of the statute of limitations so that people can't, prosecute crimes 10, 15 years after the fact? I'm trying to make sure I get your point.
Eliminating statute of limitations means there's no limitation on when it can be investigated and charged.
Okay, so you're arguing that it should be an unlimited amount of time for folks. So this is just, so you want to expand the statute of limitations, I guess, technically for infinity, not get rid of it completely.
Well, infinity would mean effectively it has no purpose.
Sure. So even if it were, let's say, like 100 years or something, if at that point. So I guess then, to my point, is that you can already prosecute crimes. Technically, the statute of limitations is really just the government prosecuting crimes. Folks can also do that separately for certain cases. But would you
There's a
agree
statute of
that
limitation on civil matters as well. That also should be eliminated.
Okay, so you think that, okay, so this is, you're going to apply this to both civil and criminal cases. All right, so would you say that that evidence, therefore, you think that because of technology today, that evidence can be used to figure out crimes that were committed how long ago? 75 years ago, hundreds of years ago? Like, what are
I mean,
your, what do
using
you
modern
think?
day DNA technology, we've solved cold cases from like the 70s and the 60s.
Would you say that DNA is the only piece of evidence that can help solve cases?
No, but like that's one of the ones that we started using first to go back and solve these cold cases. And most of those are murders, so we actually could prosecute them. If it was any other crime, we would not have been able to actually prosecute them because of the current statute of limitations, which is the dumbest shit.
Okay. And then what about the governmental abuse? Don't you think that if the government can use this now unlimited amount of time to prosecute people, wouldn't you think that would be abuse of power by the government to do so?
It's an abuse of power to investigate criminals for crimes they commit.
Well, if you have certain people
How do
in
you think
charge
that
of the
that's an abuse of
government,
power? How do you think that's an abuse of power?
well, we see who's in charge of government today. You don't think that they can go back and start charging people with crimes that they can use their own court
Well,
system for
evidentiary
to
standards
prosecute?
still exist.
Sure, it doesn't mean that they can't make a case that goes in front of the judge and waste your time and money for it.
Yeah, but I prefer that over a bunch of people getting away with, rape, assault, uh, any litany of other crimes, corruption.
Okay, fair enough. I see my time. Sure. So, my opponent will argue that eliminating the statute of limitations would strengthen justice in the United States, but I believe that it would do the very opposite and weaken the foundation of our legal system that's built on fairness, reliability, excuse me, and accountability. So, the statute of limitations exists because evidence does not last forever. I know my opponent has talked about the advancement of technology, which is true in some cases, especially with retrieving DNA over time. But that's really a very small, specific piece of evidence that, if you look at cases over the years and centuries and decades, that DNA is not the end all be all. And there are other pieces of evidence that are used that we don't have enough advanced technology as of today to really overcome, the decay of time. So memories fade over time, witnesses become unavailable, or physical evidence deteriorates. And when a case is brought decades after an alleged event, we are no longer relying on solid proof. We are relying on incomplete and unreliable information. So that would dramatically increase the risk of wrongful convictions, and a justice system that convicts the wrong person is not delivering justice at all. I also mentioned too in my cross-examination that, the statute of limitations serve as a critical check on government power, and they prevent prosecutors from bringing cases, whatever it is politically convenient or strategically advantageous, long after the facts have become unclear. So without these limits, that door opens to abuse, where individuals can be targeted based on weak or outdated claims that can no longer be properly challenged. I mean, even as we were talking earlier, if we had somebody who was put into power at the executive level and over time has changed the way that the courts are formed to kind of support that current political party or person in power, over time that can have detrimental effects on how we prosecute political crimes decades down the road. We've seen how the change of courts can affect generations. So I think that that's another big important piece. And then also, my opponent will claim that removing the statute of limitations would reduce issues, maybe like retrials, but that misunderstands how the legal system works. So let's say that retrials are governed by protections like the double jeopardy clause and appellate procedures. So not by time limits on when a case begins. In fact, allowing older, weaker cases into court would likely increase appeals and retrials due to unreliable evidence. So imagine all of the people who now have an unlimited amount of time to bring up cases that they think are worthy, that may or may not be, but now that's more time for the courts, that takes up for the courts for serious cases that are happening. So I think in conclusion, eliminating the statute of limitations doesn't strengthen justice, it weakens it. It replaces reliable evidence with uncertainty, fairness and imbalance, and accountability with unchecked power. So for a system that depends on truth and due process, that is a risk we cannot afford. And I see the rest of my time.
I want to address before I even start this that my opponent has no idea what the evidence used in cases is. The vast, vast majority of things are not based on witness testimony. They're based on actual hard evidence, evidence that can be, especially now with modern day technology, preserved over time. Castle, what I really want to ask you is, do you think that the Epstein survivors that came out about their stories in 2020 deserve justice?
Do I personally? Yeah, of course.
Right, so many of them came out publicly about things that happened 20, 30 years before they came out. Due to statute of limitations, they cannot actually get justice for the crimes perpetrated against them. Do you agree with that?
Well, that depends. I think that they can't get justice because Jeffrey Epstein himself is dead. So there really isn't anything that they can do about
Even if
him
he was still alive, he
personally.
couldn't be prosecuted for most of the stuff.
Well, isn't Ghislaine Maxwell in jail right now?
Galena's in jail for other stuff, but she's not to the extent of her crimes.
Well, I thought she was in jail because of exactly being a perpetrator in the sex trafficking that she helped with Epstein,
For
unless I
being
have that
involved
wrong.
in things, but most of the claims against her are not being prosecuted because they're past the statute of limitations.
Okay. Well, she's in jail for crimes that she had committed based on her involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, whether it's all or not even 99% of whatever she was prosecuted for had to do with that case. And I think that beyond Jeffrey Epstein and her, you have to have the government make a solid case on who is involved. So we haven't had that evidence presented yet. But I don't see why uh, that can happen in the future. I mean, are you saying that the future potential suspects in these cases can't be prosecuted at this point?
Well, I'm saying when victims come out, a decade after the fact, they cannot seek justice, even when it's the horrendous things that we all agree are horrible.
Well, I
And
agree
your
that.
claim, your side supports this being the case.
Well, I would say that over time, like I mentioned in my opening, there are facts of the case where you can't just apply it,
The only thing that
for
fades
one
is
thing like
witness
the Epstein
testimony, and
context.
witness testimony is a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of what actually goes into the evidentiary standards for cases.
That's fine, but outside of DNA, you also have to admit that we don't
You
have
have
similar
DNA, you have financial
technology.
records, you have digital records, you have flight
Okay,
records.
you do, but you don't have things like if there's hair or blood samples or anything outside of specific, fingerprints or anything like that, where the technology is not as advanced as DNA technology. So you're going to have to try to make a case just based on DNA that somebody had committed a murder. And
Based
I
on
think
DNA
that,
and financial records and tracking of people's phones, digital footprints. The
and you
world is
think
incredibly
that,
online, and you are always being tracked, and the government can access that.
so you think that DNA evidence has been able to have 100% foolproof record or
It
financial
is
records like,
one thing alone is never the evidentiary standard. It's the same reason that losing a
right.
witness is fine, because all of these things combined have allowed us to successfully close many a cold case. Cold
Well,
case murders.
do you know what the Innocence Project is? Or I'm sure you've heard of that
Yes, I
before.
do.
But many of those cases are overturned exactly because of false witness testimony. So I don't
Yeah,
think you can say it's a small
I'm
part.
agreeing with that. I'm saying that witness testimony now in the modern day courts is different than what it was 50 years ago when a lot of the people that the Innocence Project helps were convicted.
Okay, so you think that that's
Everything
changed
is
now with
better
the
now.
courts?
Everything is better now.
Everything is better.
But
Okay.
I would like to ask, since you are so pro the statute of limitations, if somebody, let's pick a state, I think California, sexual assault has a statute of limitations of 10 years. So why is it um, why is it right that on 9 years and 364 days we can prosecute someone, but on 10 years and 1 second, suddenly, magically, they will never be held to justice? Why do you think that that's the right way to handle things?
Because that's how we balance justice and fairness right now. So it's
Really,
10
when you
years
have
is a long time.
strong evidence, proof, everything?
I mean, would you
Hell,
argue
what
that
if we have it
10
on video?
would you say that 10 years is not a long time to have time for an investigation or collect evidence or locate suspects?
Well, if it takes a while for the victim to come out, sometimes these things do end up being more than 10 years.
Okay, so then you're just arguing that the victim can wait 50, 80, 90, whatever, how many years they want to just come out and say that they were assaulted by someone. So you're basically putting someone's life in the hands of somebody who just on a whim is going to decide whether or not they're prosecuted based on how they feel
Not
at
on
that
a
point.
whim, on evidence collected by a police department. We're not
Okay, but
arresting
I'm
people because
saying,
somebody claims they did something. We're arresting people because of evidence showing that they did something. Their
right. So, but
evidentiary
you're saying
standards
that
are high, and they will continue to be high. The statute of limitations doesn't change the evidentiary standard.
so what's the difference between evidence that's collected a year out and evidence that's collected 11 years out, right? You're saying that the person isn't coming forward. So how are we supposed to judge why and when a person comes forward?
What do you mean? The evidence collected is the evidence collected. That doesn't change whether it's collected now or in 5 years. The
Right.
evidence
Well,
is the
no.
evidence.
Sorry. What I mean is that let's say that the evidence is collected a year out, right? It's not 10 years where evidence can be affected by time, right? The evidence comes out, the person can then go and get justice for that. After 10 years, though, we're talking about evidence that's collected further out, and then afterwards too, you're saying that the person after 10 years, if they want to come forward, that they can't, and that's wrong because after 1 year is different than or 1 year is the same thing as coming out 10 years later. My question to you is,
I think
why aren't
that
they
this
coming
case
out
should
immediately?
because people are traumatized. People are sometimes still in danger after a crime is perpetrated against them. Think of issues of like child abuse, for example.
Yeah, but
These are
my
there are
point isn't.
situations where it's not safe for the person to come out, or they are dealing with the trauma of it. And I don't think that we should force victims to come out while they're still dealing with their trauma, when they're not ready to be telling everybody in the world.
Well, I agree with that point because there, people that we've seen in the past, especially with recent sexual assault allegations and positions of power where they don't want to come out of the person, whether they still work for them or they're still very close to them or they're scared. But 10 years is a long time. I'm not saying that that has to be 1 year. But my point was that even after 10 years, you're saying that someone can wait 20, 30, 40 years after the fact. And at that point, people have lived completely different lives. Like a generation has happened between then. So do you think it would be fair for someone to wait that long just until they're ready, 50
Yeah,
years or 40
and
years
then
later,
if
to come
there is
out?
hard evidence of the crime being committed, then that person is prosecuted. It's a very simple concept that, yes, you go to the police when you want to report that something has happened to you, and you shouldn't have an arbitrary limit set on how fast you need to do that. And the cops should be investigating and should be finding evidence of crimes. If they find evidence of the crime, they should prosecute.
Okay. I mean, I just think that 10 years, thinking that's not enough time. I think for a lot of people, most crimes are prosecuted under that time frame of 10 years. A lot of times it's literally within the same year. I think it's something like 80% of cases. So you're arguing for a really small percentage of folks. And then a lot of times too, based on the evidence that is submitted, that's either old or witness testimony that's old that I mentioned earlier, you're starting to get into very hazy and hairy territories where people forget things, stories change over time.
The
So I
evidentiary
just think
standard
that
still stands and does not change.
evidentiary standards do change over time. That you could admit that. Other than
No, what I'm
DNA,
saying is that what would take a case to actually get prosecuted, the amount of evidence, whether the actual crime happened 15 years ago or the crime happened yesterday, the same amount of evidence is needed to take it to prosecution.
okay. Well, the facts themselves might not change, but our ability to prove them does, right? You would still have to have a lawyer be
Yeah,
able to
we'd
do that in
probably be
front of the
less
courts.
successful at a lot of these old cases, but I think that we should be able to prosecute them if we have hard evidence. If we have, for example, video evidence of the person doing the crime.
Yeah, I just
Right now,
okay. I
we
mean,
just can't prosecute that.
I'll see that. I think 10 years is plenty of time for to be able to bring that forward
Do you
in
think if
most
somebody
cases.
abuses their child when their child is 4 and beats the shit out of their child, that when that child then turns 18, they should be able to report that and get justice?
Sure, I totally
Great. Your
agree that they
position does not.
deserve justice. How so?
Your position says statute of limitations. Nope, too long ago.
Well, if you're a child, the law does give you more time in cases of child abuse. It doesn't, the clock doesn't start until the victim turns 18. So they would have
Okay,
until
think of the
they're
same
like 28
situation, but
years
a
old.
domestic violence
Okay.
case. What about then?
What about it? Domestic violence.
What you have
This,
somebody stuck in a domestic violence situation. When they are 24, some bad shit happens at home, but they cannot escape this because this is what commonly happens. And let's say 15 years later, they finally get out of that and into a safe situation, and they want to report it to police and get justice. Should they be able to?
again, so the law currently delays reports for statutes such as domestic violent related crimes. So the clock is also extended for these cases. So there are cases that we have right now on the books that are extended because of this exact case, the exact points you're bringing up. So in
So
case of
these can be
domestic violence,
extended, but
child
randomly other
abuses,
ones can't. There's no problem with the evidence on these cases that are extended, but we can't do it for other crimes. Is that the claim here?
well, like you said, I think that when people are traumatized, you have to bring that into account, especially when they're younger kids. Obviously, when they're children,
Pretty
they
much
can't
every victim
really
of a crime is
themselves.
traumatized by it.
Sure. When I think that certain people are traumatized a bit more depending on their situation, but then also into the domestic violence case, I think what are you arguing that it's different than if you're bring up another case then that you think is similar to those cases.
What do you mean?
I think they're very special on
Anybody
that.
who's in a long-term interpersonal situation where their person that perpetrated a crime against them is consistently there, and they have no escape. This happens most of the time. Most people become victims of crimes from people they know.
Yeah, but ongoing abuse can be reset or extended. Like, let's say you're being assaulted or you're
I
in a
didn't say
domestic
ongoing
abuse
abuse. Let's say it's
relationship.
your boss.
Yeah.
Let's say it's your boss. Did wage theft. Should we have a statute on that? You need your job. You don't want to report your boss because you need your job. Your life depends on it. Do we need a statute?
If your boss is stealing your wage, I mean, I would hope that you would be able to speak about that and not quit your job in that case. Are you saying that the person would be stuck in their job and they can't do anything about it? I don't know. I don't know how that's similar to domestic abuse.
I'm saying that they're continuously surrounded by the person that has wronged them, and
Okay.
while still surrounded by that person, it is an unsafe situation for them to report it. It's
Okay,
unsafe in
that
this
they should.
case that they would lose their job and their livelihood.
Would you say if you're in an unsafe position at work, you would still continue to work at that same place?
Oh, I'm saying that if they report it, they'd likely get fired.
Sure. I'm
Yeah, and
sure
then
they
they
would,
don't have a
but
job. They don't
they
have a
would
livelihood. Quit your
they
job
would
right
also
now.
be able
Quit
they
your
would
job
also
right
be
now.
able to sue they would also be able to sue their boss for
If they have the
whatever
money to
abuse they
sue,
incurred.
the money that the boss already stole.
I think it would be
Quit your job,
easy to take
Castle.
that
Could you quit your
case.
job right now and be chill?
No, I couldn't.
See, you see where the problem
You're
comes in.
are you asking me if I could quit my job or is this something happening at work? I mean, that's an important distinction.
No, what I'm saying is that this creates an unsafe situation because people can't just up and be fired from their job, which inevitably is what happens a lot of the time when you
I
report
agree. It's
wrongdoings
a
by your
major
employer.
it is a major inconvenience, but also at the same time, you have to think and protect yourself and your health first and foremost between any financial
So if we have
decisions. So I
evidence of
think
these crimes, if we have payroll evidence of these crimes of wage theft, and this person cannot get a new job for another like 15 years, and in 15 years gets a new job, moves to a different company, should they then be able to go back and report that wage theft that happened and have that
I
be
think that
investigated and prosecuted?
you're just expanding it too much now. Like at first it was
Answer the question,
domestic
yes or
abuse
no.
and child
I'm
abuse,
giving
and
you a
now it's like,
bunch
well,
of
what about wage
examples.
theft? I
I'm
know,
giving you a bunch of
but
examples
there
because no statutes of limitations should exist. So
no,
yes, I'm
you shouldn't be
expanding.
able. If it takes you more than 10 years to say my boss took money from me, then that's your fault. Honestly, in this case, it's different than a child. It's different than abuse. If you're just talking about wage
It's
theft in this
your
case,
fault
then
that
I
your
would.
boss took money from you.
No, I'm saying it's your fault that you weren't able to report that within 10 years. I mean, come on. You are we how are we going to expand this for 99% of crimes or 99% of civil cases when you have actual cases that make sense for people to take more time to report and
If
then it's
the
something like
evidence is
wage
still
theft.
strong, why does it matter that it took 10 years?
Why does it matter that you didn't report it after the fact that your wage was stolen? I
Yeah,
think that
if
then it
there's strong
starts to
evidence
set
of the
doubt in
crime,
people's minds where it's like, well, think about it psychology in
if there's
a
strong evidence of the crime, why does it matter?
think about it psychologically. If I said my boss took money from me 10 years later, what would be the first question people would think is, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you report it?
Doesn't matter.
I think that's a fair
Doesn't matter.
question. Then it
If
starts
there's
to
hard
set doubt in
evidence of the
people's
crime, why does
minds.
that matter?
If there's hard evidence of a crime, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be reporting it immediately.
Doesn't
That's
matter.
why.
That's not answering my question. Why does it matter that it took 10 years if there's evidence of the crime? If we can very obviously prove that this person committed a crime, why does it matter that it's 10 years later?
Okay, let's say that you're right. It would matter because this is something that would have to go to court, and like I mentioned in my opening, waste the court's time. You're going to have a jury that takes time out of their day to say, "Oh," that ask the same question I'm asking is, "Oh, why is this person waiting 10 years later? And do I trust them if they can't come out immediately and say something? Do they have something against their
You're
boss?"
not trusting them reporting, you're trusting the evidence. The court does not rely on a
Okay.
victim said that something happened, and so that's it. Done. It's evidence.
Okay. And do you think that evidence is 100% foolproof with jury systems? Because we've seen that before, how it's
Financial
not.
records. Financial records aren't. Those are hard records, for example, right? These
And
are
a good
things that
lawyer can
prove
explain
a
them.
crime. These are
I'm
things
not
that
saying.
prove a crime. And yes, the person being accused of something still should be able to get their day in court and defend themselves. And if they can successfully do that, then great. That's due process. But
Okay,
completely
I'm the
cutting
person's
off the ability for this to happen is disregarding justice for the victims of crimes.
I'm the person's boss, and I said that I garnished their wages because they were performing sexual favors for me, and they told me that it was okay. So, I mean, you can come up with a whole bunch of different
Great.
reasons, but it
Evidence.
doesn't mean
Find
that
it.
it doesn't mean that the prosecution or the defense has foolproof evidence, whether it's financial or whatever. So, I think that's why it's a waste of time for the courts in this case, because after 10 years of a financial crime, it's going to be hard for both parties to prove each other is wrong.
No, it's not. The financial records are hard records. But we could go back to the previous example I gave where the crime is on video. There's video of the person committing the crime, right? But suddenly, after a
Okay.
magical example, 10 years, we can't do anything about it? Really? Why do you think that's okay?
Again, it's the same situation. If there's a crime committed, it will be prosecuted against.
The statute of limitations explicitly bars the prosecution of these cases when they come later.
And we all know that a video can capture a moment in time, but it doesn't mean that it captured what led up to that. It doesn't mean what showed after the fact. So,
Yeah,
of
they can
course,
defend
there's
themselves in court.
He mentioned the potentiality for new administrations pursuing political retributions. It feels like a pretty valid concern. Can you give me some sort of a way for us to some other form of guardrail than statute of limitations that would help to prevent that? Or are you
Well, the
just
same
willing to
guardrails that
accept that as a potential problem?
it's the same guardrails that exist for any case that is not yet reached the statute of limitations. It's the fact that we have evidentiary standards, and we have for the feds we have grand juries, but we have jury trials and all of these things to make sure that the evidence is actually there and that the person actually did the crime. Like the at whim investigations of random people, it doesn't really factor in here when you have to actually go to court and prove your claim.
Oftentimes, the statute of limitations is a money-saving measure to prevent cases remaining open for decades. In your view, is the increased cost worth the small number of cases that might be prosecuted and reach convictions?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, that was my question.
Same reason that we still investigate cold cases.
Yeah, if we already adjust statutes of limitations for serious crimes like murder and stuff like that, and we also have things like tolling statutes of limitations to change those on a case by case basis, what's the argument for repealing all of them rather than just refocusing or refining them case by case?
I don't think that we should force victims to come out and give testimony while they're still like incredibly traumatized. That's one thing. It's a big reason that a lot of rape cases, for example, never go anywhere, is because the only way they can go anywhere right now is when we force victims to testify in front of court while they are still actively incredibly traumatized by whatever thing took place. Allowing this to take longer and still relying on solid evidence before we're prosecuting anything um, just makes room for more justice. It makes room for less people getting away with crimes.
Yeah. Should my city be able to send me like a jaywalking ticket or something 30 years after the fact?
I don't think anybody sends jaywalking tickets anyways, but
Well, it is a
I mean,
crime,
if they have
and they could have
evidence
a
of
video
you,
of me crossing the road.
if they have evidence of you jaywalking, then yes, they could issue you a fine.
So can you explain for me again how it is that people don't just have to wait out their statute of limitations to be absolved of their crime legally?
Yeah, so I think that criminals don't just wait it out. They have to avoid detection, which is difficult and risky. I mean, if you want to skip the country and live a new life somewhere else, plenty of people have had to spend time and money trying to do that. And that still doesn't mean that you won't get caught either way. So crimes like murder, they don't have a statute of limitation. Those are the cases where someone might try to wait it out. But like I said, you're still going to be out, have warrants internationally if you skip the country. And then again, like waiting things out, you're going to have to avoid arrest for years, avoid leaving evidence around, avoid being identified. I mean, most criminals are caught because of certain investigations or witnesses and new evidence over time. So if they can successfully evade detection for decades, the issue isn't the time limit. It's really the evidence, and that's probably like the two main points I would say there.
If the statute of limitations were removed, do you believe that prosecutors would bring weaker cases to court just because they're old?
I would say in general that if you have a case that is being brought 20, 30 years after the fact, and I'm not saying that all of them are going to be weak, but I think that the strongest cases are brought to courts much more quickly after the fact of a case. I mean, think about it. Just common sense would tell you that evidence is fresher, witness testimony is fresher. Prosecutors have everybody around that they need, that they want to ask questions to, and so on. So, like, over time, people pass away, evidence deteriorates, and all that. So, I think in general, it's safe to say, and we've seen this too, like, a lot of times when court cases are brought up 20, 30 years later, whether it's even a retrial, that the evidence is usually harder to use to prosecute somebody in those cases. So yeah, I think overall, generally, that's my view, is that I think that a lot of cases past a certain time are going to be bogging down the courts. And like you said too, like money wise, this is going to be wasting money that could be used otherwise to help current cases on the books that are much stronger.
Yeah, which would you say is more important, ensuring every guilty person can be prosecuted or preventing any kind of risk of unfair trials?
It's a good question. Um, I would say I would say unfair trials, plainly.
All right. So as we discussed back and forth again and again, the statute of limitations, all it does is shut off the ability for accountability. We recognize this as a society when it comes to murder charges. We recognize that this is a serious crime and any perpetrator should be investigated and charged if it is possible to charge them. And there's no reason to not have this happen with every other crime. At the end of the day, things only get brought to the courts if they are founded and backed by actual evidence. Plenty of cold cases that have been solved using things like DNA as the biggest thing. Plenty of these cold case murders have been solved and have been had incredibly strong evidence at trial. They can be just as strong as these new current cases. Not everyone is going to be solved, of course, but they can be just as strong as the current day cases that are brought before the court for more recent crimes. At the end of the day, the truth and exposing the truth for everybody to see is incredibly important for our justice system. With statute of limitations, accountability expires, but the actual truth doesn't. The truth stands and just never sees the light of day. Just set by an arbitrary year after the event has taken place. Due process continues to exist and can protect any defendants in these cases, right? They still have the ability to defend themselves. They still have the presumed innocent until proven guilty, right? They still have all of these protections, so it's not actually putting them at risk. It is just hammering out the evidence in front of a jury for the people to decide whether or not this person is guilty of a crime and whether or not this person will see the justice system from the inside. Yeah, we have DNA, digital records, financial trails. We have 24/7 fucking surveillance of all of us at this point in time, and for the last 25 years, this has been the case. It is incredibly easy to gather evidence, especially in the last 25 years in the United States. And all of these things can be proven if we actually allow our justice system to prove that people perpetrated crimes.
All right, so my opponent did a really good job of keeping his foot on the pedal with a lot of questions for me and me not being able to get to some of my main points. So kudos for him. But I think he still failed to do a good job on the rebuttals because he brought a lot of appeal to emotion. Obviously, when you're asked about Epstein or child abuse cases or domestic violence, emotion is a lot to weigh for folks, and I think that when you look at that, you can't let that overcome actual evidence when it comes to these cases. And I think that time is important, And the government is also another aspect in this case that we touched on briefly, but was hoping to get more into, because you're going to have the government look after you and look at you for eternity. And I don't think that's a good thing. But I think that, to get to my main points here, the statutes of limitations exist because evidence does not last forever. I know my opponent like to say, well, what if there's video evidence? What there's DNA evidence? All of these things have to add up to a case, and that's up for lawyers and a judge and a jury to decide upon. You can't take each of these individual elements and claim just because you have somebody on camera doing something that explains a whole case. This is why they deserve to be convicted of a charge, so on and so forth. So I think that that's important to think about when a case is brought decades after an alleged event. We're no longer relying on solid proof, no matter how solid you think that it is. We're relying on incomplete and unreliable information. Secondly, eliminating the statute of limitations undermines basic fairness and due process. Every person accused of a crime has a right to defend themselves, but how can someone do that if key witnesses have passed away, or documents are lost, or evidence no longer exists? So without time limits, individuals could face accusations from 20, 30, 40 years ago, like we were arguing in our back and forth section. If somebody wants to wait 10 years or 15 years for a sexual abuse allegation, again, those statute of limitations have been enhanced for those reasons. If you want to bring a case about stolen property or whatever it is, something lesser than, we talked about wage theft, then that's a different scenario entirely, where you have to use the law to your advantage. Otherwise, those cases are going to be part of what the judges have to look through on a day-to-day basis, which, like I mentioned, takes up a lot of money and time into the system that is going to be cause for other serious and important cases to be logjammed and backed up for. So I think it's important to remember the court system takes in thousands and thousands and thousands of cases every day. And now we want cold cases to pop up that will take even more time, that have even less of a chance of being solved into the court system as well now. So you have to think about how many resources we already have for these things. And I think it's important when you round that all up together that, eliminating the statute of limitations, it will not strengthen the justice system. It will weaken it overall.